Tonight we're discussing the ramifications of the death of President Mills. 24 hours ago, we all returned from lunch to the very sad news of the passing away of the sitting president of the Republic of Ghana, Professor John Evans Atta Mills. This, indeed, is the first time in the history of this country that we lost a sitting president who, by the information we received from the Office of the President, passed away after a short illness at the 37 Military Hospital in Accra. There have been talks about the legal implications of swearing in the Vice President as the substantive president. Indeed, the Constitution makes it clear that in the absence of the president, this is what has to be done. But considering that this has never happened in our history, we'll explore the legal precedents of what this means, and then we'll look at other issues surrounding the death of the president. And I have with me in the studio Nana Asante Bedietuo, who is a legal practitioner, to help us explore this issue. And then also later on, we will get onto the phone line to Reverend Amodako, who is a member of the clergy and a very close friend of President Mills. Welcome to PM Express. You can join us with your comments and texts by short code 1760 and on our Facebook wall, facebook.com, multi-TV Ghana, and our other Facebook platform. So, Nana Asante Bedietuo, thanks very much for coming into the studio. The president passing away whilst he was still in office, and it's obvious, like I said in my introduction, that the Constitution made it clear that the processes of transition from there on. What do you make of this situation as a legal practitioner, and what do you think this means to our country's democracy and our ability to go according to the dictates of our Constitution?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think we should all offer each other and ourselves the most profound condolences. I think we've lost our leader, but as they say in Akan, so we're fortunate that our Constitution has made provision for a transitional process, which now has the former Vice President assume office as the President. I think in the midst of our grief, I think it is fair to say that we've handled this rather well. There have been no hiccups at all. Apart from perhaps the obvious delay or logistical difficulty of getting Parliament together, which took some time, because as you know, Parliament is already beginning the process of going on recess, so most of the parliamentarians were not around, and the Constitution is clear that whenever any person subscribes and takes the oath of office, they must do so before Parliament. I'm quite impressed by the process so far, and for the benefit of your viewers who may not be familiar, the Constitution says very clearly that if the President resigns from office, is removed from office through impeachment, or dies in office, as is the current situation, the Vice President will become the President. But before the Vice President can become the President, he must swear the oath of office, and the oath that is reserved for the President. He's already sworn the oath of the Vice President, but he must take the oath of office before he can assume the presidency. He must do so before Parliament, and that is why the Speaker and the Clerks of Parliament summoned Parliament to come, so that the President could perform that
constitutional
obligation, yes. Now, the Constitution also requires, obviously now there's a vacancy at the Vice Presidency, and the Constitution requires that the President nominate a person who shall be approved by Parliament. Now, I'm sure some of the questions agitating the minds of viewers is, but why is Parliament the electoral college in this instance? Well, this is because this has occurred at a time when we are not in a general election. And since the people must elect, and the people are not in a position to do so, Parliament representing the people, or the people's representatives, stand in our place to approve the President's nominee for Vice President. You may know that under the rules regarding nominations for President generally, one of the things that a presidential candidate must do when they've been nominated by their party and they've been registered as the presidential candidate is to provide a person, or to nominate a person themselves who will be the vice president. And in fact, on the nomination forms, if there's no name for vice presidential candidate, the forms are not complete and you cannot be said to have registered. So it's an important part of the ticket is an important part of the process. So having assumed office, he must now nominate a person who shall be approved by Parliament. I've had some calls today regarding when he is required to do so. The Constitution says simply that upon assumption of office. Now, upon assumption of office means that once he has taken the oath, because he cannot assume office until he's taken the oath, once he takes the oath, he must nominate. But clearly, there is no specific time provided in the Constitution. It doesn't say immediately after he assumes office, or a day after, or an hour after.
Exactly what I was coming to. I mean, seeing that there is this gap in the Constitution, do you think, you know, from the legal point of view, that it would have been more helpful in our situation now if there was specific limit of how many days the president has to be, the vice president has to be sworn in, and how long it should take for him to nominate somebody for the position of vice president?
Oh, sure. I think you know, it's one of the things that, as your introduction to this topic, you said, look, let's look at the legal implications. I think one of the things that has come out clearly is that the residual powers of Parliament to sort of fill in gaps comes into play, and it seems to me that Parliament must pass a law, even though hopefully it will not be used. It will be used very sparingly, because we don't want our presidents dying in office.
Yes.
But nonetheless, as we have now seen, these are things that can happen, and therefore Parliament would be required to pass a law to determine just when the president would have to appoint or nominate a person for vice president. You will also notice that there is no, similarly, there is no timetable for a president to nominate ministers after a general election when he's sworn the oath. And sometimes it takes 3 months before ministers are in place.
You think are constitutional loopholes?
I think so. I think
we must be considering.
We must.
Does it surprise you that the Constitutional Review Committee Commission, for example, didn't make recommendations on these areas? I
think, you know, it doesn't surprise me in the sense that, you know, oftentimes you may know that, in fact, even the NDC Constitution also makes absolutely no provision for what happens when a presidential candidate, or the flag bearer, he's not yet a presidential candidate, but he was the flag bearer, dies, what happens? I think it's because human nature being what it is, we really don't like to contemplate these things as death and so on. And so when we contemplate it, we contemplate it on the basis of the path of least resistance, the most minimum that we need to do. So we do say in our Constitution that if the president dies, the vice president takes over. Normal. When the processes should kick in and when things should happen is entirely up in the air. And I think perhaps Parliament ought to now look at passing a law to cover some of these things. Now, having said that, I think in terms of legal, statutory legal interpretation, when normally the law requires you to do something following an event, and in this case, assumption of office, it is regarded that you must do it forthwith. In other words, immediately. But of course, this is a political situation, and given that it's a sudden death, and the vice president has become the president, he now needs to, it's not as though there's somebody waiting to fill in the vice presidency. He now needs to consult with his party, consult within and without his party, in terms of who he will nominate.
Which normally takes time.
And yes, and so, but nonetheless, it would have to be within a reasonable time. And I think that you cannot say that I'm going on without a vice president for the next 3 months, or for example, well, I'm going to have to present myself at Congress if he wants to run again, and also pick a running mate. So I'll just wait until I do all of that.
Nana Santibedieto, I have on the line Reverend Amodako. I'll speak with him and then I'll come back later to you. Good evening, sir, and we're very grateful for your time.
Good evening. The line is just not too clear, but I'll make do with it.
Preston Mills, we're told, is a very close friend of yours, and you must be in real distress hearing of his passing this way.
Well, that is an understatement, brother, because I said that his chaplain, the chapel that he himself initiated at the castle.
Reverend Amodako, I apologize. I think we have a terrible line. There's some feedback in the line. We'll try and drop this call and call back again to see if it will be better. Thank you very much, sir. So, Nana Bedietu, we're talking about the gaps, the supposed gaps in the Constitution regarding time frame, reasonable time frame. You said that the new president must have a reasonable time frame to choose a new vice president.
Yes, I would say. I mean, I don't think this process needs to, take a long time. I would envision that certainly upon assumption of office, within a day or two, the president ought to be nominating a vice president. I mean, in spite of the consultation that needs to take place, I don't think that, given that political parties exist and operate on a daily basis, they know who the players are, they know what they need to do in terms of whether they're looking for regional balance or a certain level of competence and so on. They know who their people are. I don't imagine the president will be looking outside his party, and therefore he will know those within his party that are eligible as far as he's concerned. He needs to look at somebody who he's compatible with, so that narrows the scope quite considerably, and therefore should make it not a terribly difficult decision for him to make. I think on a personal level, I think perhaps in satisfying interest groups within his own party might be what would be the challenge. But I suspect also that those who would qualify and are eligible are also known. That pool of people are known, and ultimately it is up to him. Parliament would have to approve, and therefore once the Constitution says that it is with the prior approval of Parliament, we imagine that this particular individual would go through some sort of vetting process, as the ministers do in Parliament. And so once he's nominated, I expect the Appointments Committee to also quickly put themselves together and vet the person, and then vote according to their conscience and see whether this person is fit to be our vice president.
Here in a chat with legal practitioner Nana Santibedietu, we're talking about the legal ramifications of Mills's death on this country, being the first time that a sitting president has passed away while in office and necessitating an activation of a constitutional provision, thereby swearing in the vice president as his president, is something that has never happened in our history before. Now, Nana Santibedietu, this evening, the NDC national chairman, speaking on Joy FM on our platform, did mention that the president, who by his position as president of their government is automatically the leader of their party, has been kind of nominated or acclaimed by a functional executives whose nomination will be endorsed at a National Executive Committee meeting tomorrow. Do you see anything wrong with this process when it comes to the law?
Well, I think I heard Mr. Asiedu Nketia as well, and what I heard him say was that the Constitution of the National Democratic Congress makes it clear that whenever the National Democratic Congress is the ruling government, the president is the leader of the party. Given President Mills's demise and the assumption of the presidency by His Excellency John Mahama, it would make him the leader of the National Democratic Congress, it does not make him the flag bearer for the pending elections. And as I heard him say, in his view, the Constitution of the National Democratic Congress does not make provision for a situation where a person has been elected as flag bearer to contest general elections and that person dies.
Passes away, yeah.
And so in his view, since the Constitution of the NDC does not provide for what happens, the Constitution provides that when there is a lacuna, a gap, or an issue that is not provided for by the Constitution, the National Executive Council or Committee is to devise a process by which, or rules by which, that problem is solved. So in Mr. Siedun Ketia's view, the National Executive Committee is going to meet tomorrow to devise the process by which the presidential candidate of the NDC will be selected. Now, he didn't stop there.
Is this wrong? I mean, seeing that there is only 4 to 5 months more to elections.
Well, I think as a matter of law, I had some difficulty with what he was saying. Because in his view, the process for electing a flag bearer when the flag bearer has died is not catered for. It's not as though there was a deputy flag bearer and it says that if you, or let's say there's a running mate, which the current president was, and therefore if the flag bearer is not around, the running mate simply takes over. But you see, the difficulty is that in Mr. Siedun Ketia's view, the National Executive Council is going to decide what to do. So in his view, the National Executive Council, for example, could simply pick anybody they liked to become the flag bearer. My difficulty as a matter of law is that, you know, if I were advising, I would say, look, there is a process for selecting a flag bearer. That is not in dispute.
Which is go to Congress, for the flag bearer to be voted for.
Precisely. Now, and so that is not in dispute. And I'm not sure Mr. Siedun Ketia is saying that there is no provision for selecting a flag bearer. But then he goes on to say that if the flag bearer has died, we don't know what to do. So, and if you know, if you heard him right, he kept on making the point. And I think that the point he was trying to make was that we're not going to Congress. Really. I mean, that is what it boils down to. We're not going to Congress. We're going to have the National Executive Council determine who becomes our flag bearer.
Nominate by popular acclamation. That wouldn't be wrong.
Well, now,
that wouldn't be the first time.
Well, now the difficulty is, it may very well be that they could, to be fair to him, it may very well be that the National Executive Committee will say, look, we're going to open nominations, but the National Executive Committee will form the Electoral College. We won't go to the General Congress. We will determine which of the nominees or applicants for the job we're going to take. I think that, again, would also be flawed because...
Problematic, because they would have to amend the requirements of forming an electoral college.
Well, yeah,
captured in their constitution.
They're saying that they have residual powers because when you see, I'm trying to distinguish between, I have no doubt that they have residual powers, that if something is not provided for in their constitution, the National Executive Council or Committee is empowered to take steps to deal with it.
And such residual powers are not unusual. Not unusual.
Even under our constitution, residual powers are reserved to Parliament where the Constitution does not deal with the matter. But I'm saying that in this instance of electing a flag bearer, their Constitution of the National Democratic Congress already provides a mechanism for electing a flag bearer. So if your flag bearer is no more, it is difficult for me to see how you then say that the Constitution does not provide for what to do, and therefore we're going to make the rules. I think that they may be opening themselves up to legal challenge. If somebody believes that, no, this is a decision that must be taken by a lot more people, the Congress, the grassroots, and not simply the elected officers or the National Executive, which I believe includes the regional chairman and so on. We think the grassroots ought to be able to participate in this, and we think that organizing a Congress should not, it's a one-day affair, and we think that we ought to, you know, and again, there's an assumption that it seems to me Mr. Isiedun Ketia is making, which is that Mr. John Mahama will be running for the to be flag bearer, when in fact we don't know that. It may very well be that Mr. Mahama might say, you know what, after this finishing President Mills's term, I won't be interested. Yeah. That is a possibility. Now, when that happens, is Mr. Isiedun Ketia saying that the National Executive Committee will formulate a system by which they themselves can pick anybody they like? Will they invite nominations? I think the jury is out, quite frankly, on what they need to do. But I would say that as a matter of equity, fairness, and constitutional integrity, they ought to follow the process by which the Constitution says a flag bearer ought to be elected. Yes.
And you don't see this position as perhaps playing into their hands to kind of eliminate other interested parties who might want the flag bearership after the president passed away?
This is certainly a concern. I think, you know, again, listening to Mr. Isiedun Ketia this evening, I think if you read the subtext of what he was saying, he was keen to establish that, you know, we're not going to open this up. You know, as far as we're concerned, we have powers, residual powers, and we're going to use that to make a determination. And that determination, the party will have to go along with. In fact, I heard him say so. Now, I think it is not difficult for some people to take the view that this system that Mr. Isiedun Ketia is advocating for electing a new flag bearer might in fact be designed to eliminate certain people who may otherwise want to contest and who may have their support outside of the National Executive Council. So I think that is why I'm saying that they could very well be opening themselves up to legal challenge. And I doubt that that would be a good thing 4 months to an election, where now somebody is in court fighting about the correct process not being followed and so on. Because I do believe that if it came to the question of how does the NDC elect a flag bearer, that is in their constitution. And I think the death of Professor Mills ought not to raise the specter of no provision governing the election of a flag bearer. It's simply and you know, the general rule, especially in Ghana, as in other places, the general rule is that the people who elect are the same people who what? Sack, right? If I have the power of appointing... Yes. So the people of Ghana elect a president, and they're the only people who can vote him out.
Exactly. Unless
he has done something wrong. And then the impeachment takes place, the people's representatives do it. In the institution of chieftaincy, for example, in Ghana, the kingmakers are the only people who can destool. So those who enstool are the people who can destool. It is interesting that at this time, the posture of Mr. Isiedun Ketia seems to me to suggest that perhaps the people, the grassroots of the NDC, the ordinary members who would ordinarily form the Electoral College, are not important. Perhaps he's dealing with the exigency of time, 4 months, but I think if the National Executive Council can meet, so can the Congress as well in a day. And I think it would be better for the democratic principles that perhaps they go to Congress rather than have a smaller group of people do it. Now, somebody might respond to what I'm saying by saying, well, the vice president nominee that Mr. Mahama is going to put across is not going to be elected by the people of this country. He's going to be endorsed by the people's representatives. And if the National Executive Council of the NDC represents the larger group membership of the party, why can't they make the selection? But I think there's a couple of problems with that. We do know that Mr. Mahama was elected together with President Mills, so he was elected by the people. We also do know that Mr. Mahama was not elected by the people of the NDC to be the running mate to Professor Mills. He was chosen by him, yeah, and I think endorsed by the National Council. And so there are situations where it does not require the entire group to do it. But I'm saying that it is not the same thing to say that there is no process by which we select a flag bearer, which in reality, if you examine the statements being made by Mr. Isiedun Ketia, that is what it leads to, that we really don't have a process for selecting a flag bearer, because I don't think the fact of Professor Mills's death ought to raise a different scenario. It is just there is no flag bearer. How do we get a flag bearer? And the rules are clear.
Now, moving a little away from the law, the health status of the president was shrouded in so much secrecy that at the time of his death, it came as a big shock to everybody in the media and all the parts, everywhere from the parts of the country. Those we've spoken to, from Takoradi to Tamale to Volta region, really attest to this fact. Do you think that the death and announcement of the death and his announcement and its announcement was handled very fairly and well?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say yes. I don't think it could have been done any other way.
I mean, the president dies, and the first thing anybody hears about it is a press statement to the media.
Well, perhaps there could have been a press conference by the vice president. But I think, to be fair to the presidency, there was, if you recall, on or about noon yesterday, thereabouts, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, there were rumors circulating that people who had gathered at the 37 military hospital, because obviously people who were close to the president were telling their friends that he had been rushed to the hospital and so on. And there were too many rumors circulating. And I think it was important that the people, the information be put out so that to put it to rest, rather than perhaps a much more determined approach like a press conference by the vice president or what have you. It would have been, I think, a bit too much, given that the rumors were already circulating and the castle needed to make a statement on it. So I'm not too concerned about the manner in which it was done.
But could it have been done better?
Oh,
Which
yes,
other ways would you recommend could have
yes,
been done a little more decently?
As I say, I think that when he was taken to the hospital, we were entitled to know. You know, if this were the United States, for example, the moment Obama was going to the hospital, that we would have been alerted. And if something happened to him, the doctors who took care of him would probably be the first people in front of the cameras to announce that, yeah, unfortunately, the president had passed away. But of course, the whole illness was shrouded in secrecy, as you say. His being taken to the hospital was also shrouded in secrecy, which I think was unfortunate, because we're entitled to know. I mean, you know, in a semantic sense, this man was our father. And it is strange that if your father is not well, it should be kept from you as a secret, you see. That, I think, was a difficulty for some of us. And I hope that in the future, we're a bit more open about
Do you think this has anything to do with our cultural systems, that we are overprotective of our leaders? We don't talk too much in public about their ailments, and we feel sometimes restrained to be circumspect when we're announcing to people that our fathers are not well? Well,
I mean, it may have something to do with it, but we're running a modern democracy, okay? We're happy to sit on radio and so on and insult our leaders every day, including the president, but we're not willing to talk about the president's health, which we are responsible for and which we pay for. I think that's wrong. And I think that, you know, the presidency is not like a secret society. It is not shrouded in any sort of divinity. You know, the cultural thing you talk about arose primarily because in years past we saw our chiefs as representing God. There was a certain divinity about them, and so we didn't talk about their being ill, being wounded. We didn't want to see them run in public sweating. We didn't like to see them eat in public because we didn't want people to see them as ordinary human beings. And so when they died, we didn't want to announce it immediately because we didn't want chaos in the kingdoms. We wanted order. We wanted the proper things to take place when a chief dies before we announce it, again, as a matter of security and so on. But I think it's very different from the presidency, and we ought to be aware of that. We ought to be informed about the health of our president. We ought to know what goes on, because we pay for it. We've elected him to work for us. I don't think, for example, that if you had employed somebody to work for you, and
they're off sick, for example,
and they're off sick, and they keep being off sick, and you're not told
performing to
they're
specification.
Absolutely, and it would not be right, would it? I mean, it seems to me that we need to move beyond those.
And how should we manage this? Should we be regulating this by passing laws?
Oh no, I think we don't need to pass a law about the president's health. We just need to be candid about, in our governance. I think we need to be clear about these things. That look, there is no point in, people make the point, for example, that FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president of the United States, was, as a result of polio, was in a wheelchair. This was not hidden from the American people. In fact, he found many, many ways to communicate with the Americans. He attended rallies. He introduced what was called the whistle-stop tour. He would take a train, and at the back of the train, where you come out, there's a bit of a space, and they would put his wheelchair there, and this is where he'd hold his rallies and so on. It was not a secret. And of course, having polio and losing the use of your legs does not mean that you can't have the use of your brain, your faculties. And therefore, it's not a problem at all. We've seen recently that the President of Venezuela, the President of Chile, various heads of state have been ill, and it's been announced. Some of them have rather serious illnesses that are maybe terminal, like cancer. We've seen all of these. What we require of our president is to work to the best of his ability as long as he's able, and nobody is going to fault our president if he's not well and he has to either resign or step aside because of that. What we require is that our president be working well. If he has some ailment that is under control, we have people working for international organizations, the World Bank, in very senior positions, who, for example, have HIV/AIDS and have had it for 20 years, but are able to function, are under medication, they take care of themselves, and they work. There are people with other rather serious, debilitating illnesses who have it under control and are able to work. And so I think we need to demystify this sort of thing so that it does not become a major problem for us, as it has now, in which the impression being created is as though the president got up one day and he just fell down and died. I think that's wrong.
We were talking about constitutional provisions, as always. Now, do you think, if we compare what happened in Ghana to what happened in Yar'Adua's case in Nigeria, where there was a long period of vacuum where they didn't know where the president was, whether he was alive or not alive. Do you think if such a situation has occurred in Ghana, our systems, our institutions were strong enough to cope with it, that they will still have relative stability until such time that we're able to clearly define whether the vice president will take over?
Oh yes, I think in terms of constitutional provisions, I mean, clearly the Constitution even makes provision for when the president and the vice president are unable to perform the functions of the office of president. The speaker will take the oath of office as president and act as such until either a new president is chosen or either the current president or vice president is able to perform the functions of the office. If there is a feeling that the president cannot perform the functions of his office because of ill health, and yet he is not is determined to hold on to the office, he can be removed from office on the grounds of ill health. And the Constitution also has a process by which...
and you think our institutions, legal structures and everything are strong enough to,
oh, yes.
to hold?
Yes, absolutely. I think, Ghana has come a very long way. I think that what happened in Nigeria was unfortunate because, again, it seems to me you had a cabal that was around the president and didn't want to put his illness out there for fear of him having to, because obviously the kind of illness that Mr. Yaradua had was such that he couldn't perform the functions of his office. It was clear to everybody. It was better to have him outside somewhere in Germany or Saudi or wherever he was and pretend that he was only doing medical treatment and that he was still working when in fact other people were running the country. Closer to home, if the rumors are to be believed, our own president was having difficulty at times attending to his office. But again, we had a situation where, in his case, he had so taken President Mahama under his wing that it wasn't a difficult situation. Mr. Mahama appeared to be holding the fort. In the Nigerian case, it was a bit different because those around the president appeared not to want to have the vice president step in, and so there was a pretense that he was still running affairs. But I do hope that we're all going to learn from what has happened, and again, as I say, be a little more open, transparent, and candid about some of these matters. I don't believe a thorough medical checkup of presidential candidates before they assume office is going to change anything, because
but would that be necessary?
I don't think so.
This brings me to what I earlier mentioned. This afternoon we had an exclusive interview with former President Jerry John Rawlings, who made damning allegations about the state of, I won't call them allegations, but he was revealing details about his health as far back as 2004. If that is to be believed, then the suggestion is that the president was unwell to assume the office of president when he did in 2009. Do you think that perhaps the Constitution should provide more rigorous medical checks or procedures for persons who want to hold themselves out as presidents?
Well, no. I mean, I think that would be improper, to be honest with you. I think that would be discriminatory. I don't think
human right violation.
Yes, I don't think you should discriminate against people because of their health. I think that, you know, ultimately it's a personal choice as to whether you think that you can do the job. Again, the Constitution has safeguards for us, the people. If you cannot do the job because of your ill health, we can get rid of you. It would not be proper, I think, to...
And it's not criminal to be unwell.
No,
or
it's not at all,
health.
okay?
Yeah.
And I think also that somebody who you think is going to die tomorrow may live... you know, a friend of mine told me a story about their grandfather who was told not to eat salt. Otherwise, he will die. And he says, well, you know, I'm 70 years old. What do I care? I mean, I've had enough of life. My children are all grown. I've done well, and my children are doing okay. I think if I die, fine, but I'm not going to stop eating salt. Apparently, he ate salt and lived for another 28 years, died at 98. Oh. So, I mean, I think only God can determine when somebody is going to go. There are people who have terminal illnesses, which people think they will not survive for 5 years, and they don't. The famous U.S. basketball player, Magic Johnson, who was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS when I first started law school, and he has been around now for 20 years. So you think somebody's going to die tomorrow, and he's living a full life, still married and all of that.
Full fulfilled life.
Yes. So I think it would be unfair to discriminate on the basis of one's health, and indeed our Constitution frowns on it. But I think that people ought to be candid with themselves and candid with us about it. And when it comes time, because the office of the president is not a small office. You know, I was joking that if you look at the U.S. presidents, I was around in the U.S. when Bill Clinton became president, and he was this flamboyant, brown-haired guy, and within a couple of years of being president, he had gone gray. We can see that with Barack Obama as well, in which within 2 years of him being president, suddenly his hair turned gray.
Being a president is a big deal.
It's a big deal, and it's a big deal in a third world country. The competing interests are enormous, and you've got to really be able to deal with it. Otherwise, the stress is too much. And I think nobody who is unwell should be able to deal with that kind of stress.
And it will be better for your own self when you're candid
and
with
for
yourself.
your country.
Yeah.
And for your country.
Now let's talk about the situation we have on our hand. The Vice President, now President of Ghana, he would have 5 months to act in the position of President till the next election. If he puts himself out for election, that will mean that he has finished Mills's first term within the next 5 months. Does he qualify to hold himself out again for another 2 terms if he wins elections?
Oh, yes. The Constitution says basically that, look, if you succeed a president who is gone out of office, either because he's resigned, been removed, or has died, and there is less than half of the term left, then you can come back on your own steam for 2 terms. If there's more than half, so if there's 2 years and 1 hour, or 2 years and 1 day left, you can only come back for 1 term. If there's less than 2 years, because it's a 4-year term, half is 2 years. If there's less than 2 years, anything below 2 years, you can only come back, you can come back for 2 terms. So if this had happened...
But why do you think the framers of the Constitution made these provisions?
Well, I think precisely because the Vice President is not the President, and it is safe to say that he's merely completing somebody else's term. And therefore, that should not play against him. But of course, the balance is that if we want to really be very strict about the 2-term thing, we've got to draw the line somewhere. And I think they made a choice to draw the line at half of the person's term, so that you are able to serve 10 years at most as president. Because if you succeed when there is 2 more years left on or just about 2 years more left on the previous president's term, you add that to your 8 years, you're just about under 10 years. But anything over 2 years, they say no. You just come back because, for example, 2 years and 1 day or 2 years and 6 months plus your 4 years, you're talking about 6.5 years or 6 years, that's okay.
Now, quickly before we wrap up, I wouldn't leave you to go without asking you a political question. How do you think the death of the president, former president, Professor Mills, is going to play out in the dynamics of campaigning an election for 2012?
Well, I mean, the thing is that I've always said that in Ghana we dwell a little too much on personalities in our political campaigns. Perhaps what is going to happen now is that Professor Mills is no longer around, but his record is. And if we stick to people's records, perhaps that's the best way that we do campaign, so that the invectives and the insults and the crass character assassinations we can do away with. But he does have a record, and so the opposition parties can deal with that record. We also, in this particular situation, we've got a situation where the Vice President cannot claim to be immune from whatever is good or bad with the Mills presidency, because they've been associated, working together. I mean, apparently he's the chairman of the economic management team and the like. So I think it's 2 for the price of 1. I don't think the opposition parties are going to have any difficulty dealing with the issues in relation to the Mills-Mahama presidency.
But you will predict that we'll have a fair and peaceful elections?
Oh, I have no doubt. I think that, you know, there may be some 1 or 2, you know, I mean, there's always some idiot somewhere who wants to cause some trouble. But I think by and large, we're going to have a very, very, very peaceful election.
Thank you very much, Nana Asante Bediatuo, for your insightful discussion on the ramifications of Mills's death.